Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Biggening Corporation. This is our 39th episode, and today we are continuing our push through what hopefully will be a short run of episodes to get to minimum viable product, version 0.1 that we were talking about in the previous episode. And today we are going to focus on the first one on our list we spun up yesterday, which is going to be player permissions. Now, this will be an interesting challenge for me, in a way, because I am a developer primarily day to day, and so it has been about 8 years since I've been the responsible party for making sure permissions are working. And on top of that, we are potentially having people play in the system that are clever developer types or at least familiar with Business Central, so we have to be particularly careful about how we build this permission set. So we're going to have a few different challenges. We know that there's going to be a small number of base tables in the core product itself that will be necessary for players to be able to modify. Interesting. I admit I've never set up permissions since extensions, so I don't know, for example, when we add fields to a table, do we set up permissions for the table or the table extension? I'm suspecting the table. Today we're going to find out. That's easy enough. And we also primarily want the users that are going to be players in the system to have read-only access, but read-only access to just about the whole darn thing. And there, to my knowledge, there is no built-in role for just give them effectively superpowers throughout the whole system. So we're going to revisit some permissions basic because I'm frankly a little fuzzy on the topic. And there are some things that have been added to the product since the last time I was the guy on the permission side of things. So let's scooch our window to be the proper size here. Good. Okay. So our first thing that we should probably talk about, in case anyone following along in the stream here or on YouTube is unfamiliar with the permission system as it works. Let's talk about that. So we glossed over it a little tiny bit here. When we look at users get a permission set. This is a set of permissions, as the name might imply, and they can also potentially get their permissions through permission sets that are assigned to user groups. It's a nice little multi-layer kind of handling, and if you wanted to go all out and crazy in a Windows authentication environment, I believe you can also assign permissions to a Windows group, and their Active Directory membership will drive their permissions inside of BC. But I've only seen a couple of customers make use of that so far because it's very unclear and hard to figure out within Business Central what permissions a user has if they inherit that from group membership. So let's look at, we have the ability to, on our users, as mentioned, groups. They can be in different groups in different companies, and importantly, they can have permission sets that are specific to specific companies as well. So what we effectively are going to need for our Biggening Corporation environment is we want the players to have read-only access to pretty much everything within their company, and we want them to have the basic tables that they need to be able to open the company up. So there are some system tables that are required, like user personalization and some of the setup tables. And then we've also set up some extensions on some of the base tables that we are going to need them to be able to modify: customer, vendor, location, I believe item as well. So we're going to have to catalog some of our tables, and then we also have, well, frankly, a lot of objects in our workspace that we're going to have to decide, do they or don't they have write access to all these? And thankfully we have a real nice easy insight into that with the object designer here. So thanks to the object designer, we can see for our given workspace how many tables we're looking at. We have to decide what can the players read versus what can they have write permission to as well. And some of that's going to be indirect. So we got to test a bunch of things out today. Okay, so let's start with a simple one. We know that the users need to have the ability to have permissions to log into the system and to not get an error message from logging in. If we go look at the permission sets on that, for example, let's take a look at well, for starters, let's look at super, because that's the one that a lot of companies will just haphazardly throw on everyone. And if we look at the permission sets and we look at permissions for super, we can see that by the different object types, with 0 here for the ID on filter, they get read and insert and modify, delete, execute permissions across the board for everything. So this is a nice way of being able to do fallback permissions to say, okay, you know what, every report in the system, they can go ahead and run that, no problem. Report 0, done, sorted. And what you will see is that most of the time, any sort of base role that is going to be your starting point for users will have a table, report, code unit, XML port, menu suite, page, and query. These ones across the board will all be set up like this at some level, that all of those are going to be runnable objects. And the important thing to note about the way the permission system works is that the table data is often where the restrictions are put in place. You don't care so much that that a user can access what fields a table has, but you sure care about their ability to access within the table. So if we look at one of the, let's go with sales and receivable customer edit role here. If we look at the permissions on that, you'll see that almost all of the individual definitions of the many tables related to this are all about the table data. So you will see significant amounts of yes permissions and indirect. Indirect permissions mean that they are allowed to if the object in question would allow them to make some changes. Like, let's see here. So sales invoice header, for example, or sales shipment header is a good one. There's a function in the base product where you can go, whoops, we forgot to add a tracking number to this posted sales shipment header. Well, you can't, as a normal operation, edit a posted document. So they created a little page set that you can update the posted sales header. And that's cool, and that's a good thing. But for the player to be, for the user to be able to do that, they needed some indirect modification permission. And because that's here, that combines with the page object's permission to have that update power. Whereas someone who might have only been assigned permissions under the purchasing role wouldn't be able to run that same routine. So it's a pretty interesting little way of doing things. Our challenge is going to be that I don't think out of the box there's any just I want the user to be able to log in and I'll figure out the rest of the permissions from there role built into the standard product. So if we look, for example, at basic user, this is something quote-unquote all-inclusive. As you can see, there's a ton of like read permissions across all over the place. And there's also a lot of yeses all over the place. So that is potentially problematic for how we want to do our tight player controls. So how do we get started? Well, once upon a time, in the olden days, we had to create new permission sets by what we thought the user would need. And as you can imagine, this was hit or miss. And there, even to this day, are still some great solutions on the market space that make managing this permission area of the system a little bit easier, even with all the things that Microsoft's added to this. So what we're going to make use of that I haven't used much, so hopefully it goes well, is we're going to make a test permission set. Basic one. And you'll note that it flags this as user defined because we're creating it. So this is just going to be our test basic user. And all we want this user to be able to do is for sure log in. That's it. Now when we go into the permissions of one of these system ones, you'll see it flags up here that permission sets of type system and extension can't be changed. It tells us that only the user type can be changed. So if we go down to our test, I am blind. Where did test user go? That's peculiar. Oh, it's sorted on type. Okay. Weird. I wonder how I managed that. Anyways, so here on our test basic one, now here we have an editable version of this view. So we could potentially do all of the basic setup. So let's do, we're going to do, as mentioned before, we're going to give them all of the core permissions for all of the other object types, and then much like the base product itself, we are only going to control it at the table data level. So, like so. Now, system's another story. System is a little bit trickier. If we take a look here, system is a virtual type of object, and this is all the different commands that are possible in the system, and many of these I'm guessing are deprecated. You obviously can't do file database alter in the web client era, so let's see. There are lots of granular controls, and it'll be interesting to see which ones of these that we end up needing to give the average player. Like, I don't know if edit find, edit replace, and these view filters are I don't know if those are relevant anymore, to be honest. I mean, half of these still refer to menus that don't exist. Wow. A significant chunk of these are very unclear as to whether we even need these anymore. So we're not going to assign any of them, see where it goes. Okay. Delete that. We'll see what happens. Now, my thinking here is that we have assigned very, very limited permissions and things like that to this. So my expectation is a user that we assign this role will not be able to function. It'll get some error messages right away. And just for testing sake, we're going to try that out real quick, because I expect it to blow up pretty badly. Okay, pardon. So I've got a test user here, and right now it has no permissions. So we're going to do our permission set of test basic one, I think, something. Now, we're not going to assign a company restriction to this just yet. In the long run of things, we will absolutely do some per company restrictions for our players. That makes total sense, because they should only be able to read their own company. Go figure. Okay, so let's see if we do a new private browser window here. Let's go to our test. Our test user. We should, I would expect, get some pretty awful permission errors. Yep. Perfectly makes sense. So the minute we get into the system, it's already trying to read some basic setup tables, and we don't have permissions on that. So we say okay, and basically we're going to get kicked out. That's the end of that. There's no more information that we can get for that. So how do we suss this out and figure it out. Let's see here. Alright. What I'm hoping we can do is if we come back to the permissions here, I've not tried this out much, but we have the ability to record what's going to happen and generate permissions based on that recording. That sounds pretty useful. Let's see what happens. Honestly, I actually don't know. Do I want to start the recording now? Yeah, sure. Okay. I'm not sure what it's recording. I would have expected it to have, like opened up a new session or something, and that way we can get the whole experience of opening up a company. Let's, for giggles, open a different company, and that way we get all the permissions of opening that separate company, in theory. Okay, I don't know how much that might have broken the permission recording. Let's find out. I did not want to edit the list, I wanted to edit the permissions. Yep, not recording. Okay, so did this stop working in this version of NAV? Just refresh. Oops. So does this do anything? Wow. Okay. So as far as I can tell, at least unless I'm using it terribly wrong, I don't think this works now. Okay. That's bizarre. I thought this would still be in here, but just checking over the Microsoft Docs here. Okay. On permissions, choose record, start, capture all your actions, come back to permissions, choose stop. Good theory. Not working. Okay. Alright. Well, that's a real challenge for us, because I would really like to be able to record the permissions of, doing anything. And yet, here we are. No permission recording whatsoever. Oh, you know what? Oh, I've seen this before in code coverage. There's a funky little thing where you potentially, if you're going to monitor your code, you have to open a new window from a provided link inside the code coverage page. I bet you that's what's going on here. So it's a little button that you don't necessarily pay a whole lot of attention to, but check this out. There's a tiny button here to open this page in a new window. I bet you we have to hit yes here and leave this page open and click that. And now we can leave this page open in the background and go do other stuff. And it still shows that we're recording now. Okay. That might work. We'll see. I'm just going to go to the roll center, refresh, and then stop, and we'll see what it gets us. Okay, do we want to add the recorded permissions? Yeah, sure. Huh. Okay. Well, that gave us something. I mean, it didn't really give us everything, for sure. Like it was unnecessarily giving us some table permissions down here. We've already got that covered. And I definitely did not see the permissions added that we ran into when we tried to log in as a user. So I wonder if we can open this permission recording and still potentially change companies, because I think that would be better set of permissions, but let's find out. I don't know what happens when we change company in the other window. Let's find out. Boop. I'm watching it on my other screen here, and it's still watching. Okay. Yeah. Alright, we got some... Well, we got some more of the tables that I was expecting to see. We also got a crud ton of things that we don't need. Allow export to Excel. Good golly. Alright, well, what's interesting to me is that this still did not pull any of the setup tables that I was expecting it to pull. And that just may be because when we were logging in as that test user, they were trying to log into Cronus, where there's a lot more setup. So let's try something out here. We've updated Test Basic with a lot of stuff now, but if we go and tell the system that user personalizations, yep, that's still the right place. Cool. Here in the user personalization, let's tell this user that they should be using Test Player 5, not the Cronus company. And let's also specifically identify it to use the player role sender. So that way we're minimizing how much potential trouble they might get into. Let's try logging in as them. I don't know what'll happen, to be honest with you. Let's find out. Okay, so we're still getting some table data issues. Alright, rather than tear our hair out trying to figure out all of these separately, my inclination is to say let's add those tables. Now, one of the things that I might put into ideas here is, like, we're slowly getting away from object IDs. It seems like they're trying to obfuscate it more and more, but here in permissions we still need the dang table ID. So why in the message here where it says table data marketing setup, don't we just get the object ID for marketing setup? Yeah, crazy idea. So let's add marketing setup read permission. Exciting, super fun, not fun at all. Okay, you don't have permission to use the role center play. You don't have permission from role center? That's an interesting. Okay. Now, for extra fun, we also, as a user, can't log out. Brilliant. What do we have to do to give permission for a role center? Oy. Okay. Okay, well, alright, we got past the marketing setup. So this is the sort of nonsense that is, I would have wanted the recorder to help me with, that we're now having to do this one by one on trying to solve all the individual error messages that we're going to run into. And it's solve one, fix it, and go to the next one, solve one, fix it, go to the next. Ugh, I hate that. But your users will hate this more, so it's important to really know what you're trying to set up for them. Okay, we're still getting you do not have permission. Interesting. I honestly... okay. So here is a system table, I'm guessing, user login. Now this one is one of the ones that I would have wanted it to see. That would be an insert type thing going into one of the setup tables. I don't know with permission recorder, how are we supposed to capture login permissions? I mean, really? How are you supposed to do that? So hopefully someone in comments or whatnot might have a better idea than I do, but this just seems like such a bananas way to fight with this. I know you can copy permissions from another role, but I believe you have to copy like all of them at a time, which is also crazy. And I don't think you can filter on what you're copying. So let's take a look at some of the system things that were potentially missing. And it was complaining about user login. So that was interesting. Where does that exist in our pile of objects? Not in here. Where do you live? Okay. Anyone have any guesses as to what the heck the search is trying to accomplish? Is it just looking for things with space in it? What the heck? Alright. Wowzers. User logins in the 9000 series. What? Man. What a messy little thing. Okay. I don't even know what to say about that. My hunch is that we need also user setup. I could be wrong there. Oof. I mean, I admit I was hoping that the session recorder was going to springboard us past a lot of this stuff, so this is a little bit of a... oh, darn. Okay. Okay. Oh, sorry. That was interesting. I was entering a new object into the permission list still in this open window here, but that one already exists down here, so it was complaining about that permission already existing. Yes. Revert the change. It's fine. And it was complaining of it wanted us to be able to do all sorts of modifications to this table. Okay, sure. So this is going to be a little more trial and error of an episode than I would like it to be. I mean, that's not interesting for anybody, to be honest, but I mean, it's what we got. It's what we need to do. Let's see. I don't think I typed that right. You don't have permissions to read the user table. Oh, okay, brilliant. Wow. Alright, yeah, there's gotta be... I know that there are some third-party solutions out there for permission recording that do it from a SQL perspective, and those apparently still definitely have value if we're going to be running into insane situations like this. In our copy permission set, yeah, you can't filter the copy permission set, so that's well done there. If we export basic XML, ugh, I don't know why my system is using Internet Explorer as the default XML handler either, so that's also ugh. I'm currently trying out Edge, but you know that's not our jam here. So if we grab our export permission sets and we open this up, and I'm just looking real quick through the permissions here. I was trying to see if it'd be possible for us to filter it to maybe just like the system tables, so that way we could do something cool with just import those. Can I potentially open the XML in Excel and filter on that? Because it still will be faster than fighting with the individual tables in the UI. Let's find out. or as an XML table. Okay, cool. I dig it. Thanks, Excel. I don't suppose you'll let me save this back to XML? I bet you won't. Alright. Sometimes you gotta try things just to see how they'll go, and I don't think it's gonna pan out for me here. I think I'm gonna have to do some silly things to get this data back out. Let's see. Delete rows. Okay, so theoretically I'm just keeping all of these giant 2 billion numbers. And I don't know what these system ones are at the bottom of the basic user. Let's go take a look. Okay, so they keep still edit, view, and tools, change your password. That makes sense. Okay, I like that. Let's, if I want to export this back to XML, I don't know if I can do that. Save as. Yep. Alright, I don't know that I can do that. The XML maps in this workbook are not exportable. Brilliant. Okay. So every tool that is provided in here that theoretically maybe might help me out does not actually help me out. Wow. That's, I've got words for that, but I don't particularly want to swear on stream. That feels very backwards and poorly done. Now, like the permission recording process for business processes is totally rock solid. I liked how it did capture a lot of the things that we were trying to do. It's just there's no apparent built-in permission for I just want my user to be able to log in. And that's where we're running into all of our troubles. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not going to bore us to tears with that particular fight. I could spend the next part of this half hour just fighting with that, I suspect. So let's dial back a little bit and see what we can do about the fact that we know that we're also going to have to add a new permission set for the players within this object set, because we've got a ton of stuff in here and we've got a player profile, so we should have a player permission set. Okay, well that's cool. Let's check out what we got here for. There is an AL command to generate permission set object containing the current extension objects, and that's kind of cool. Whew, okay, apparently whatever I just did there killed the heck out of my bit rate and almost broke the stream. That's exciting. Okay. Apologies to anyone who is following along there. I just crumpled things a little bit. Okay. Well, anyways, so if we take a look, that little palette command created this big giant, frankly too giant, XML file with every single object in the system under a brand new role called role permission set. Here is Biggening Corporation Engine. Oh, okay. I don't know, where did it get engine? Oh, that's, the app name. It's been so long since we've named it, I didn't remember that was part of the name. Alright, sure. I find it interesting. I was almost expecting there to be an open with and we could, edit this XML file in kind of like a cool table fashion with all of the vast sea of extensions that I have installed, that something would make this potentially an editable thing in a useful way. And no. The short of that is no. Okay. So first of all, before we go much further here, we've got this giant permission set file now, and let's change this. We'll call it Biggening. It's so weird to me that it created that role ID that big. I didn't know that permission set names could be that long without throwing an error. So we'll call it Biggen all. So that way it's super clear what permissions are involved in this. Maybe even just to be consistent, super, because this is kind of the super user of this product. Sure. Because I want to go look at what that actually looks like inside the permission UI. So let's find out. And that'll be our first publish of the episode. Hopefully this time I won't crump whatever I crumped to the bitrate here. That's first time I've done that. Weird. Okay, so yeah, I'll figure out what we need to do off camera for the a basic. We just need the user to be able to log in, and then strip out all of the Biggening Corporation specific stuff. I think I'll add that as a permission set XML to this repo, so that way people can snag that if they want and import that XML and just have a read-only I want the user to log in. Because, wowzers. Okay, so now that we've done the publish, if we refresh our permission set, we should have an extension driven one here, Biggen Super. Cool. Okay, what does that actually look like? That's what I thought. Okay, so what it did is it plopped down table data entries, yes, across the board for everything, and it also added all of the individual entries for all of these individual objects. Okay. I mean, there's nothing specifically wrong with that, it's just not... Alright. It's a little weird. I don't think that's one I'm gonna keep, I guess, but... Alright. But anyways, it gives us an interesting insight into a few things. For starters, that we have about 25 tables, and that matches up. It did not have to add any permissions around table data for the extension. So it's relying on the fact that as solution developers, if we extend core tables, which we certainly did a lot of, or at least a good chunk of, let's take a look here. Okay, well, I guess only 5. It relies on the fact that we are potentially going to handle those permissions separately from our extension auto-generated XML permission set. So I don't think that's a bad idea, but it's super something to be aware of, that when you create your permission set for a given extension and you're expecting maybe like 30 tables should now be modified, or in my case 5 tables should be modified, and I want to assign players specific permissions around these, well, those objects are not in that XML file that gets auto-generated. Now, there's nothing to prevent us from editing this XML file and going ahead and putting in those object IDs. In fact, I think we'll want to do that. But yeah, so for the most part, I suspect I'm going to clear out almost all of the non-table data related object types, just purge them entirely. And then I'm going to need to go through each one of these table data entries and go, is that something that the player should be able to read? Yes. Should they be able to insert, modify, delete? Nope. Okay. And we also need to think about a couple of different pieces. We have a variety of tables that are setup tables that are shared between all of our different entities, like, for example, bot template, game setup, some of the error logs. All of those data per company know tables. We need to give players permissions to those tables in a way that is not company specific. But we absolutely do want to give them bot instance permissions that is table specific. So as we craft the new role centers, let's say, for example, we'll come up here just to give an example of what they might look like. I'll underscore these in the beginning as examples. We want to have a role where players can read the intercompany setup. So we'll have to have a role just for that, and then separately we'll want to have I guess we'll kind of make it somewhat similar to some of the naming down here, but we're going to obviously generate these in the XML file separately, but then the player can change data. This player edit role would get permissions yeah, there we are. The player permission will have the bot instance, and then the way that'll look in our user table, this one, we would give them the test basic that eventually will be our full basic the user can log in. Then we would also want to give them the descending. What? Where are all my parenthesis buddies? What the? Oh, that's interesting. Scope here is showing as tenant. Okay, alright, weird. Anyways, they would get the intercompany read, same thing, no company restriction. But then last but not least, they'd get descending the player edit. If this is our test player 5 user, they would have the company specific permission for that one. So this will let them read the general system login. Why are you jumping around on the screen here? What the heck? This will give them the basic ability to log in, the basic ability to read all of the intercompany setup, and those are not company restricted. One of the common issues that I will see if people start setting up permissions for users the first time in a more restrictive fashion in a multi-company database is that they will think that a given user in, say, company A, all of their permissions should be restricted to company A, but there are some fundamental ground roles that you will need to have no company restriction on. Otherwise, it will not work. So, yeah, thing to be aware of. Okay. The nice thing is that if we needed to, we could set these two permissions that are going to be always on every player and always not company specific. We could put those into a user group. And then we can have the user permission set just contain the permission, which is probably how we're going to code that, because we've got our player management code unit nice and simple in here for our administration of players here. So we currently just generate the user. we don't do anything with permissions at this point in time, because that is flagged to do. So we will want to add the user permissions. So the way that'll work is we will eventually be creating a user group called Biggening player, and we will add these two to that. We will probably go ahead and code the creation of that group in here manually to make sure it exists, because the permissions are going to be popped into here that the groups will be relying on, but the user group itself, I don't believe there's any way we can predefine that. So we'll do a safety check in the code unit itself to make sure that the user group exists. Equally, we could do an on-install check to make sure that when we install that user group exists, but there's no harm to doing that as part of this code unit. Yeah, okay. So a loose rundown on where we are with that. The other odds and ends that are towards our minimum viable product is page control. Let's see. So as we saw, we are extending company info, vendor, item, location, customer. There are fields on these four, especially that the player should be able to modify. So let's make sure that we've put in place on all four of these that lockdown editability logic around things. Close you. We could probably just jump off from here, can't we? Okay, so that does the table extension, but our lockdown is on the page extension. Right. Okay, so since we're jumping off from here, we can close our Explorer on that just for a little more screen space. So if we go look at the vendor card, yep, we've got all the modifiable controls here that check if the player is an admin and locks down the page. Let's check the item card. We tidy it up, but we don't put any restrictions on it. Okay, so that's a must-do. We're going to do that in just a moment. We're not going to do that. We've got it on the customer card. Yep. And then we don't have that on location. Nope, we don't have that on location. Okay. So we need to do a bunch of lockdown on the item card, and we need to do some lockdown on the location. That we should be able to knock out the 10 minutes or so we have left. It's just going to be a little annoying cut and paste, I'm afraid. But then we'll have most of our lockdown in place, and I will do very, very boring XML editing. And figuring out step by step all of these the core permissions and things like that we need to get in there. There's probably very much clever ways to approach that, so I'll dig those up. Okay, so now here on the items, the intention I had for the item card is just that, much like on the vendor customer, we created the new section that they are allowed to edit things. So we can just lock down any other sections. Nice and simple. Let's see, so we need the item card, and we have it working the way we want on the vendor card, so we're going to keep that open. Cool. I don't think... Okay, I was going to say, I don't think I really need these little messages to tell me that I've opened the object. I know it's opened, I just saw it open. But if they fall away, then that's fine. Okay, so real simple, we're going to duplicate code, yay. I always say, if we can minimize copy and paste, then we're in good shape, but there's only so much you can do. I mean, we have to call the triggers on open page, and we need the variables defined, so what can you do? Okay, so now, nice and easy on the vendor card, we just went through all of the groups that were defined on the card that weren't the ones we added, and we said editable is admin. So we just need to do the same on the item card. On the item card, we have item inventory. So we got about 7 or so. Okay. I don't suppose... We're going to copy and paste this chunk of code so we can hopefully just minimize how much we're fighting with it. And let's see if we can show definition. And if we do our AL outline, can we nice and easy collapse all of our groups and then use that as our jumping off point? I bet we can. Cool. The way I'm going to do this on my side of things, using a little screenshot tool, I'm just going to have this as a working list so that when I change my context, it's just screenshot. If you don't use an image capture tool, I'm using that. But that way I've got a little side picture over here that'll stick with me even when I change the context to a different object, because obviously the AL outline's gone. All right. But that gave me a nice, easy work list to work off of, including all of the names of the groups, so I don't even have to wonder. It's speedy. So modify item. Whip. Modify inventory group. Modify costs and posting. Alrighty. Sometimes I don't mind, like, generally I don't mind sharing, like, okay, these are all the little shortcuts and things that I do that make things go faster. Sometimes that can be of real help. There have definitely been times in the past where I will copy and paste a whole list of fields out into Excel that I need to do, like transfers between, and I'll manipulate them and concatenate strings, and then end up with like 300 lines of code that do exactly what I need, and I didn't have to write all of it. So sometimes you can get by doing a bunch of, kind of cheeky things. Alright, so we've got some syntactical issues, perhaps. No, it could just be that it's being a little bit of a bonehead. Is that meant doesn't exist? Well, it would if you processed this, so let's fix that. Every once in a while, you gotta do it. You just gotta close and reopen. Happens. Just like, okay, fine. I'm gonna do that preemptively on the location card here. And we can close my screenshot of what the location card had for groups, and we're gonna do the same. Pop this open. We're going to use our AL outline to get all the group names nice and fast, nice and easy. And there's only 5, so that's pretty good. Grab this little list, pop it open. There we go. Now I'm just looking at the list here, and we will copy our modify code here, which I'm going to learn my lesson and copy also to include some line feeds there. Okay, so layout, we have the need to modify some sections. So let's, modify general, modify address and contact. I'm going to think about that one because I was going to let players name locations. So maybe I won't lock general. We'll take a look in just a sec, because I have no problem with players naming their warehouses things so they can keep track of, oh, this is my, advanced advanced logistics warehouse for assembly intermediary items or some silly thing like that. That's fine. Okay, and modify bit policies. There we go. Let's go take a look real quick at locations. It helps if I can type it though. Okay, so if we go in here, the only thing we would want them to be able to edit, however, in this whole chunk would be that name field. So we can go about this two ways. One, we can move the name down into player information and or we could do granular level field control over the general tab. I'm inclined to make a copy of the name field down in player info, so that way it becomes much more easy for the player to just collapse general and only look at the player info. I think that feels like a better choice because streamline things a little bit. No big, that's easy enough, and we are going to make that the first field here in the player info. Field player loc name. One thing that I'm not doing that it's gonna come back to haunt me is I am not tool tipping a lot of fields, and eventually that's gonna be a problem. That's fine though. Okay, alright, cool. So that fixes up. Those are some of the only core tables that we would potentially want players to edit. So, yeah, alright. Well, I've got some homework to do for tomorrow to tidy up the roles, and as you saw, we have an awfully ugly permission set file editing job to do. I am sure there's a smarter way to do that, so I'm going to go chase that up, and hopefully I will come back and say, oh yeah, it was just this, I'm being a nitwit, and share that tomorrow as a quick thing in the beginning of our episode tomorrow. So we have one little to-do that will hang over from our permission episode, which is that we need to in our player management code unit, we are going to create a new function to assign the permissions based off of those new ones, the new roles that we're generating. That sounds fine. That's, a few minutes in a separate episode somewhere. So, okay, well, I will call that one more small step towards player permission and page controls. I don't want to cross the whole thing off because that would be a lie, but we're pretty close. Okay, and I guess then after the recap tomorrow on permissions, we will see what we can power through on location templates and constraints. I don't think there's, because we're just trying to get to minimum viable product and just do basic location, there's not a lot left to do there. We just need to add a location purchasing workflow. So that's not a big deal. And that'll put us in some pretty good shape. We can focus a little bit more on research UI. Okay, cool. I like it. Good stuff. Well, thank you again for watching for another episode, and take care, everyone. See you tomorrow. Bye now.